You know, if you ask Google, does Python support multithreading? It's not hard to come across answers like this one. CPython doesn't support multithreading, which is disheartening. Let's do an experiment. Let's go back in time to the year of 1992. Believe it or not, this is me in 1992. Here you can see some Java and JavaScript in 1992. In case it's not obvious, they didn't exist back then. Here you can see a multi-core CPU that you could just buy, take off the shelf, and put in your personal PC in 1992. Again, in case it's not obvious, they didn't exist at this time. And here you can see the Python logo from 1992. Yes, with threading support, and it had threading support since 1992, and it had this support right now, currently, with the GIL. So this is obviously false. How about this one? Who thinks this is false? Yep. Try running any of your multi-threading Python app, any multi-threading Python code on your multi-core machine. You will see that multiple cores are being actually used. How about this one? Who thinks this is false? Okay. So this is a third one, and it is so obviously it is true. But throughout this presentation, I will try to show you why this is true, what are the implications of that, and to some extent, how to deal with this problem. I'm Jacek Kołodziej. I run long distances. I wander from one metal show to another, and from one hill to another, sometimes taking pictures. I also lived with these two roommates. And also, day to day, I'm a principal software engineer working with teams responsible for search engine, for showing offers/products in a Central European e-commerce company called Allegro, where we use quite a few technical stacks, among them Python. We use Python extensively for many different use cases. Back to the GIL. Whoa. To really talk about the GIL in CPython, we need to build some context. We need to collect some prerequisites. And first, what even are threads? It's easier to start with what the process is. A process in a computer science lingo is basically an instance of our application, a manifestation of an act of running our code. And as such, it has at least one thread, which would be the main thread, and it can spin more threads if this is useful for some work. And what's very important in the context of the GIL is that these threads within a process share memory. All threads, at least from the operating system's perspective, have access to the same memory space. Throughout this presentation, whenever I say threads, whenever I say something about threading, I will mean the system threads. They are also in Python called POSIX threads or native threads or kernel threads. For this presentation, this distinction doesn't really matter. What matters is that this is as opposed to any other type of concurrency that we have available in the Python ecosystem. Because we have many that also use the term thread, but they are something pretty different. For example, green threads or light threads in some libraries. And what's important also here is that a thread at any given moment can be in one of three states. It can be runnable because it was just have been created. It can be already running or currently running, meaning it currently executes some operations using CPU, or it can be waiting for something to happen. This something typically is, for example, a system call. And a system call may mean, for example, sleeping. Even as basic thing as sleeping is a system call, but also any kind of I/O also needs any I/O access needs a system call to work. If we're touching the subject of the GIL, it's because of a need of achieving parallelism. But what is that really? At least for me, parallelism is a form of concurrency, is one of many forms of concurrency. Parallelism is special in one regard. To achieve, because parallelism means actually running something physically, simultaneously, in parallel. And for that, you need multiple units of execution. Meaning, if at some point in time, you have a thread that executes some instructions on one computational unit, on one core, to have something run in parallel, you actually need a separate core. Simple as that. Other forms of concurrency may split the work into so fine-grained like units of work to give you an illusion of parallelism, whereas they can fit this work onto a single computational unit. Parallelism invokes the subject of race conditions. So very briefly, a race condition is typically it's a problem in our applications. Imagine a situation where you have a simple variable, a simple place in memory where you store number 1. And imagine you have a program that runs in parallel 2 threads that have very simple job. Just take this value, subtract 1 from it, and store it back to this shared place. So statistically, it might happen that this operation will overlap in such a way that will produce an invalid result. So briefly, one gets into the thread, the first thread on the left. One also gets to the thread on the right. And you probably already see the problem here. The first thread will subtract 1 from 1, which is 0. It will store the 0 back to the variable. And the second thread will do the same thing, whereas typically it's not what we wanted to achieve. So what are locks? Locks are basically a tool to prevent that. They are also often called mutexes, from mutual exclusion, meaning when you use a lock, you do it to guarantee that a shared resource is mutually exclusive for a single thread at a time to achieve what you want with your code. Also, some lingo, a lock can be like locked or sometimes being called held, and other way around, maybe unlocked and or released. So that's the remaining code for this entire presentation. If you use locking, you guarantee that this line, protected with a lock, will be executed entirely by a single thread at a time. So the second thread will always wait for the first thread here to complete. So we end up with the correct result, no matter what. Some of you probably were at yesterday talks by Julia or Vinicius. Sorry if I misspelled the name. But to recap, CPython primarily base its memory management on reference counters, which is a very, very simple yet amazingly effective mechanism. Each Python object in your Python programs have a number attached to it, which is the number of references that point to your object. So imagine we have some object, let's call it B, we have one reference to it. As soon as there happens to be a second reference, this counter gets incremented. And of course, as soon as we remove these references, this number gets decremented. And within CPython's interpreter, as soon as this number gets to 0, the next thing CPython will do will be deleting this object. The trouble is, these reference counters are shared resources, and as such needs locking to be correct. There's also a secondary mechanism. There is a garbage collector in CPython, which is basically, I think, only to detect reference cycles when we have multiple objects pointing at each other in cycle. In such a scenario, neither of these reference counters will drop to 0, so you need a separate mechanism that will detect such situations and act accordingly. So this is as opposed to other ecosystems that use different mechanisms for managing their memory. Namely, JVM languages like Java, Kotlin, Scala, and so on, or C#, for example, use something called tracing garbage collector, which is much more robust, including in terms of free threading, but also these mechanisms are also much more, significantly more complex to implement and to maintain. This is the reason CPython didn't just switch to tracing garbage collecting, because it will make quite a few people's lives significantly more hard. So even deeper into Python, what is bytecode even? You may come across questions like, is Python interpreted or compiled? So the answer to that is both. I say yes. So each time you run, or almost each time you run Python code, it first gets compiled into bytecode, which for very, very basic Python code here will look like this. Don't try to memorize it. This is not important. What's important is that these are the instructions interpreted later by CPython's interpreter. And these are the instructions that can only be processed one by one and by one thread only at a time, no matter how many CPU cores you have. This is all the context we need to talk about the GIL. So what is GIL, the Global Interpreter Lock? It's a mechanism for us maintainers of our Python code, for us maintainers of C extensions, for us maintainers of libraries, and so on and so forth, to protect us from race conditions in some shared resources, starting with reference counters, but also in, I say, C mutable data structures. So C mutable means not only dictionaries or lists or sets or your custom classes and so on, but also strings, also integers, also tuples. If you are writing an evil C extension, you can modify them underneath. There's also quite a lot of internal global state. Well, a lot is a strong word, but it gets decreasing. But still, there is some internal state within any CPython's interpreter, which needs some protection against race conditions. And there are some atomic APIs in CPython that currently, again, are being protected by the GIL. And for just getting rid of the GIL, we would need to put quite a lot of effort to still have thread safety. And last, but very, very not least, all the C extensions starting with all your NumPys, with all your pandases, PyTorches, you know, all of them have been throughout the history of Python, which is like well over 3 decades now, have been written with the assumption that there is a global interpreter log. So changing that is certainly not an overnight job. It is also very important to note that holding the GIL and still have thread safety for our applications is not needed in many situations, starting with waiting for I/O. Each time your code reaches for some file, it will make a system call, of course, to access I/O, but first it will release the GIL so that other threads can do stuff in the meantime. You also don't need to hold the GIL when your code doesn't interact with Python objects. And in pure Python, this is pretty much impossible. But if you're writing C extension or using CPython with its no-GIL decorator, you can do it. You can make operations on the data structures, for example, in C or in Fortran, in case of NumPy, and let other threads written in Python utilize the CPU, the other CPU cores in this time. I have another version of this talk, when at this point I go through how the switching between threads and releasing and reholding the GIL works underneath. If you are interested, you can Google this talk. You will find at least slides. I believe you will be able to also find some recordings. But here is a very, very brief visualization of 3 threads where only one thread at a time has this green representing executing bytecode, only one at a time. So it looks like very, very underutilized CPU, and admittedly it is, but some threads, depending on your actual code, may not be just idly waiting there. They may be waiting for I/O, which means they would be waiting for I/O anyway, with the GIL being part of CPython's implementation or not. So what I mean is that often it's not very big of a problem that the GIL is there. And here are a few paths. Don't bother memorizing them. At the end of this presentation, there will be a link to the slides, so it will make things easier, I believe. And that's pretty much it about the GIL itself. So if you are unhappy with how much there is to talk about the GIL, well, let's talk afterwards. But it's not the end of the presentation. I promised I will be talking about getting rid of the GIL. And it's not certainly a new idea. But there are some expectations to be met. The first expectation is that of performance. And it's kind of obvious that, that if we imagine CPython without the GIL, we mean CPython that will run multi-threaded code with performance scaling up with the number, of course. This is kind of obvious. What's a little bit less obvious is that single-threaded execution cannot be any slower than it is with the GIL. And surprisingly, it is very, very hard to achieve. Second expectation is that we need to retain backwards compatibility for C extensions, all the C extensions out there that were written with the assumption that there is this global interpreter log. And third expectation is that CPython's code base cannot get like significantly more complex. So to my understanding, this pretty much rules out the tracing garbage collecting. And there were multiple attempts to getting rid of this block. Not later than 4 years after introducing multithreading into CPython, there was the project called free threading patch. Then there were a lot of discussions because this attempt obviously failed. The second one, Python SafeThread, was less naive, let's say. You can read about both of them on the internet, and I provide the links on my webpage to some discussions about these projects. In 2016, when I first prepared this presentation, it was a few months after the GILectomy project started, and unfortunately, 2 months after my talk, the project basically died because it appears that actually getting rid of the GIL and meet these expectations is a very hard problem. It's not only a matter of putting enough work into that. If it would be as simple as that, it would happen much earlier, but it's not. In 2023, though, PEP 703 has been coined, making the global interpreter lock optional in CPython. So I've seen at least one talk mentioning this PEP on this conference, which makes me happy. And first, it proposes quite a few changes. I very much encourage you to actually read the PEP. It's quite long, but it's very readable. It's filled with very technical details. But if you are into that, this is a very good piece of work. The narrative itself. But at least some of these changes were tried before. This is what's new. This small flag is what's new. And it may be not a very big thing, but it actually is. Because, it's not like the physics changed, allowing us to do some new stuff on computers. No. The expectations changed because of how our community evolved, because how Python's popularity grew, because how many more use cases are there for Python. Expectation changed here. Single-threaded code execution must not be significantly slower, which is a significant change. And sorry. Yes, in a good faith. And also retaining backwards compatibility for C extensions when removing the GIL from CPython is basically impossible. But we want to do it anyway. So we cannot guarantee this. But what we can do is provide a migration path. So what this PEP proposes is, right now we have Python builds in our package managers and and so on, with the GIL, of course. The plan is that with 3.13, which comes up this fall, there will be a second build available to you in all your Linux distros and Windowses and Mac OSs, and you can choose which one you want to use. And of course, quite a lot of things will break with the second build. This is very much expected. And then what will happen is that all of us will adjust to having no GIL in CPython. Well, I'm talking in a future tense. Well, this work has actually started, because while 3.13 is not released yet in its final form, the alpha version has been released already, and this work also has started already. So what this work leads to, hopefully, is CPython without the GIL in the future. What version and what year it will be, I don't know. Maybe. But what's important here is that let's make this a reality. And because of that we don't know how much time will pass until we have this no-GIL being the default. That's why I think this talk is still kind of relevant and will be kind of relevant for some time. So in the meantime, what we can do? Well, this depends on what your applications do. If your code is basically single-threaded pure Python, the GIL is not your problem. If your code is single-threaded Python with some multi-threaded C extensions underneath, there's a high chance you already utilize CPU quite well, or rather these C extensions. If not, start with profiling. This is always a good idea, and check some configuration. Check if this library supports multiple cores. If not, maybe file an issue somewhere, or I don't know. If your code is multi-threaded, but it is I/O bound, so these are all your synchronous Django applications or Flask applications, this kind of stuff. If you think that your CPU is underutilized, start with profiling, and the simple lever that you can use that is just adding more threads. This is brute force thingy, but you can start with that, see what happens. If you're writing asynchronous and still I/O-bound code, so or your starlets or fast APIs or asynchronous Django applications, you can always run multiple processes on your machine, as many processes as you have cores on your machine, for example. And this might be enough. If in doubt, profile your code. And this is very similar to multi-threaded, to other multi-threaded I/O-bound applications. So yeah, profile, try adding more threads. But if you have multi-threaded CPU-bound code, this is the only case here where the GIL might be your problem. Start with profiling, this time for real. So cProfile will start you somewhere. You can try perf, which is much newer, much nicer. Be wary of any benchmarks. They are informative to some extent. They can give you some idea which tool will work better and which will be worse. But remember, each application, each code is different. Think how much any benchmark is representative for your particular case. That's why there are no benchmarks in this presentation. What you can try is switch to multiprocessing. Of course, this is a hard migration. You exchange better CPU utilization, probably, with more communication overhead between these processes. So it's not like it's not an easy option, really. You can look at subinterpreters, a new addition to Python 3.12. And at this point, it's only available as a C API, so it's that much harder to actually use. But you can at least consider that. You can always look for C extensions that will do the same work that you are writing in Python, the same work, but in C, or rather in Rust. Or you can consider writing your own, which is, again, a very hard decision. Especially someone will need to actually maintain this code afterwards. But this is an alternative to be considered. I already mentioned CPython's no-GIL decorator. Take a look at that. And finally, if all of these are not what you are looking for, you can consider something else than Python. Python is still like the second best language for pretty much any programming job. Sometimes, in some circumstances, switching to another thing may be like globally optimal, which is very hard to define. Always, whatever you go into, weigh all pros and cons. So not only how fast your application runs, but also What about people that will maintain the software? Think about like developer experience and all other stuff, because it's very connected. So to sum up, fingers crossed for Python 7.03, of course. If you are writing multi-threaded CPU-bound code, CPU-intensive code, there's a bunch of things within Python and otherwise that you can try. Otherwise, should you care? Most likely not. And yeah, profiling is always a good idea. Thank you very much. Thank you for being here. And do you have any questions? Yeah.
Someone asked why single-threaded code would be slower.
Perfect question. We can imagine CPython that has separate interpreters for single-threaded stuff and multi-threaded stuff. But it's not going to happen. It's like too complicated. So we would need one interpreter, one code base to execute both of these types of applications. Meaning, if we want to remove the global interpreter lock, we need to replace that mechanism with something else. This something else's may mean fine-grained locking, will mean fine-grained locking. Fine-grained locking is just slower than the global one. Simple as that.
And we have another question from someone. Many attempts failed. Do you think PEP 703 will succeed?
I didn't catch that.
Okay, yeah, we can.
Okay, so many attempts failed, and do I think this will succeed? Well, I thought that the gilectomy will succeed. So sorry, no. I don't know how to express that, but fingers crossed.
So someone asks, if Python is second, what is the best language?
Recently, I've heard that sometimes it's the third best language. Well, maybe. Yeah, honestly, I believe that this is the second best language for pretty much all the purposes. Sometimes it's the actual best. Sometimes there are something more optimal in terms of like pure computer performance. Is it enough to choose something else? For me, often it's not, but it very depends. Talk to me later.
We also have another question. Why is GIL in code infamous for slowing down the execution? Is it not just doing in code what is necessary?
Can you repeat there at the end?
Yeah, so why is GIL in code infamous for slowing down the executions? And he asks also, is it not just doing what is necessary?
So calling something infamous is like attaching emotions to that, which is often unnecessary, if you ask me. Yes, it does its job. It does precisely what we want from it. Sometimes we expect that some things can be done faster, more performant, and that's why we are attaching this infamous word to that. I don't do it, but I'm waiting for it to for CPython to change to allow multi-core execution for more cases. Like it's not related to any emotions to the GIL itself.
Do we have questions here? I can.
Do you really believe that the performance will be only a small amount of drop of the performance? Because I recall that there was an experiment to remove the GIL, and the single thread performance was dropping down to half. So I recall it on the mailing list of CPython, and that's the reason why they decided to drop completely. So I'm wondering how you can accept something like that, such very huge drop of performance. And also Armin Rigo with PyPy tried some experiment and using the Intel's thread extensions, and it was really not working. So I'm really wondering what do you think about.
I think this should be a very significant part of communicating this change. Yes, pretty much all of these three didn't even. I believe it was lower than half of the performance, maybe. There are very many benchmarks of CPython. Of course, they are. There are many benchmarks that are more official. You can go to python.org and search for the actual numbers. I believe when testing this change, the official benchmarks give us an idea how it will be, how it will look, how the ecosystem, the whole, many other applications will behave after replacing GIL with something else. So whether 2% will be acceptable, whether 10% will be acceptable, it's not up to me or any one person to decide. At least I hope so. It will be up to some consensus, and I put a point weigh all pros and cons, and this is just another place that is filled with trade-offs here. So at the end, I believe there will be a lot of discussion whether this amount of performance drop is worth this amount of performance gains in other cases. Is it worth to introduce this change?
Okay.
Yeah, thanks a lot. I'm a bit ignorant about what I'm going to ask, so maybe
we all do to some extent.
So you mentioned, there. It was there the roadmap for the after 3.13 and the moving to a no-GIL Python. So my experience with actual parallel programming or multi-threaded programming is that at least at my level, at my shitty C++ code is really unstable, and and testing is hard, especially when that's one of the reasons I started liking asynchronous programming over multi-threaded, because I have the control, and if something fucks up, it's kind of my fault, and I can draw the lines of the threads or the call routines calling each other, and I can find where the thing is. And when I give the CPU scheduler, the control, I have no idea what is happening at any point in time. So my question is, okay, during that period, that migration, considering that all of the testing of NumPy, Pandas, whatever, all the big libraries that we use, was built around the idea of the GIL, or admitting that the GIL was there, or, the GIL was there to protect those tests. Do you think it would be possible that we will have big bugs passing through those tests and going to production or to the general public, and breaking
Absolutely.
just out of the blue because nobody really thought about them, and they didn't. The scheduler was fine. The CPU scheduler was fine during the test, and so everything was built and shipped. Okay.
Thank you for the question. I'm optimistic enough to say, of course, there will be bugs. I just hope there won't be too many that will go through the cracks to actual life-affecting software. Yeah. I don't think I have much more to say.
like 2 people are asking the same question, that the website is redirecting to the wrong URL. This URL does not work, so.
Please write this down, and I will look at it just after the presentation. Thank you.
And we can take one last question if you have any.
I'm curious because always for me multiprocessing was just a go-to library. And do you think it's worth it to do all the profiling and so on for threading? Or if we have CPO-bound thing, just go multiprocessing and that's it? Or what are the disadvantages of multiprocessing?
This answer will be more generic. It will apply to this case, but also to other cases. I see an application that takes some time. Someone asks me, or I think, myself think, can it be faster? What does my intuition tells me? Or someone tells me this needs to be faster. At this point, I look at this application and think, what does it do? Then apply some form of profiling to actually get to know why is it slow, and then think whether this can be improved or not, and how. And if you have an application that uses multiprocessing and it's performant enough to your needs, at this point I would look at some different problem in my life, basically, because there are many. But if it is your actual problem right now, well, maybe it is not as performant as you would expect it to be. See what's the problem there. Maybe it utilizes every core on your machine, but the communication between the processes takes a lot of time. In such a case, switching to multithreading is an option to consider. It doesn't necessarily need to be faster. Very often it won't be, but having enough knowledge, having enough insight into what the application does will help you make the decision.
And thank you so much, Jacek. And this is the end of the session, and I hope you have a great coffee break and the rest of the conference. Bye.
Thank you again.